Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Let's Talk About. This is our weekdaily presentation series. Each weekday in September, in honor of Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, we are talking to different people about how to promote mental health, how to advocate for mental health services, community resources here in Juneau, and obviously suicide prevention, information and techniques. And these last couple days, we wanted to focus on advocacy. Yesterday, we had folks from Hatuch Lachish. Tomorrow, we're going to wrap it up with our staff and how we approach advocacy and pushing our personal convictions in terms of promoting mental health in the world. And today, we have Hannah Wesolowski from NAMI National. She is responsible for coordinating all of the advocacy efforts for each NAMI affiliate and sends us all a lot of good information that we can take out into the world and use in our own advocacy efforts. And I think that she'll provide us a lot of good information about how we can be good advocates for mental health in the world. So Hannah, thank you for joining. Appreciate you having us here today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
And just one last note for everyone, if you want to use the closed captioning service, Christy put it in the chat box. Christy's going by Becky today, according to Zoom, but the instructions are in there. But you can hit the closed captioning button on your little Zoom viewer and get captions. If you're watching this on Facebook Live, you can switch over to Zoom to get that service. So Hannah, let's get going. How does advocacy work? How do you promote advocacy? What can we do as advocates? What is advocacy? Who is an advocate? Give us the little 101 definition of this stuff in general.
Advocacy is fighting for what we believe in. I mean, it really is what NAMI is about, and I think was a cornerstone of us being founded more than 40 years ago. And anyone can be an advocate. That's the amazing thing about this. Anyone who has a passion, who has a story to tell, who has information to share, and wants to see change in their community, in their state, in the country, can really be a powerful advocate. And I think what makes NAMI advocates especially powerful, and I've worked at several organizations doing advocacy, and I think NAMI advocates and mental health advocates in general are incredibly powerful because they all have a story to share, and that's what really moves policymakers to act. When it's an organization that represents professional, I once worked for an organization that represented architects. It's not such a powerful personal story when you're trying to do advocacy. Mental health advocates really, when they share their story, they can move mountains. And I've seen it happen. I've been in these meetings and you just see a policymaker's opinion shift on an issue. And I think that's a really powerful thing.
Awesome. And who can be an advocate? Like, do we need to be a DC insider like you to be advocates, or hopefully
that's
not the case and anybody can be an advocate in their own way?
Yes, the most powerful advocates are not the DC insiders, I would say. The folks in DC have a role to play. They have a lot of expertise digging into the minutia of legislation and making sure it works how it's supposed to. But to really get the support and the groundswell to get things moving, you need everyone from the local level. Policymakers want to hear from their constituents. So certainly for members of Congress, they want to hear from the people that live in their district or their state. They don't necessarily want to hear from the folks like me who live around here. They want to hear how it's going to impact folks on the ground. And so those are the people that are really powerful, because everyone is a potential voter, everyone's a constituent, and that they work for their constituents. So that's who they want to hear from, and they want to know what the impact is going to be to their constituents. And so I think anyone who has experience to share and has a story to tell can be a powerful advocate. And in fact, I think it's more impactful to go in and share some of your personal experience, and then what would the solution be to address that situation, rather than memorizing lots of facts and statistics. Those can support your argument, but they're really not the point. The point is to really try to change opinions. That's where the folks like me can come in after to share the facts and statistics and get into the details. But advocates are really the ones who change the opinions and get people supporting issues and really wanting to make change for better.
I think that's a really helpful way to frame this. We want to change opinions. And I think we most often think of advocacy as on a political level. So going to state legislators, going to our national legislators, city assemblies and councils, but also just the general public. We want to change opinions in the public as well to promote these things. But I think that's a great framework to think about what we're really doing if we walk up to a person, whether they're an elected official or otherwise, and telling them why we think mental health is important. We ultimately want to change their opinion, either their general perspective or on a specific topic. And that's also something that we heard from Sarah Hannon. Sarah Hannon represents Juneau in the state legislature here, and that was really it. She told us to think about a 15-year-old trying to convince their parents that they should be able to do something that their parents don't want them to do. Like, you are very directly trying to get somebody from a no to a yes on a specific thing. And she said that teenagers are extremely effective advocates and that we should try to tap into that.
That's a great example. I love that.
Yeah, I think that helps really frame this for me. And the reason I'm trying so hard to frame this is because I think a lot of people consider advocacy to be this difficult thing. Like, you need to be an expert. You need to have all your talking points down. So it's helpful to hear you say, we need to have our story straight and we're trying to change an opinion, get somebody to go from no to yes on something.
Yeah, and I think it's important to practice story, and we all know that the stories that we've all lived through can be really emotional and really powerful, and I think practicing them makes them easier to share and getting them down to the basic points. We could share a lot about what we've all been through, but getting it down to kind of the highlights reel, if you will, is really important to kind of keep their attention and really get the point across. And I think it's if you think about it, you want to tell your story, you want to tell what the solution is that would help that situation, and you want to make an ask. Anytime you're talking to a policymaker, you want to ask them to do something. And that's where I see a lot of advocates get hung up. They should share great information, but they're afraid to ask for something. And that's what you're there for. And policymakers and their staff certainly expect it, but that's how you get them to commit to doing something. So making that ask is really critical.
Sorry, scrambling for the unmute there. So what are some of those asks? Like, do I just want to go to our elected officials and say, hey, care about mental health? I think that would be, I don't think that would be bad. I don't think there's a downside to that, but do we need to get into specific legislation? Do we want to talk about preserving programs that are there? What are some of the possible specific asks if we do go to our elected officials with our well-crafted stories?
Sure. Funding is a big one. I mean, making sure that there are resources there for healthcare access, for programs to support organizations like NAMI, for crisis services to divert people from criminal justice involvement. I think the one thing about the mental health space is that the issues that we work on and that we care about are so broad because there's so much impact. We work on veterans' mental health care. There's, making sure that somebody has to get inpatient care, that they have the best experience possible and improving that. There's just such a wide variety of issues to work on. I'll give a few examples just from the federal level of what we've been working on this year. So we've been working on COVID-19 related legislation. So there have been multiple packages that have passed, and then there's they're hung up on this most recent package. One version has passed the House. The Senate has proposed something but has not voted on it. The House just released a revised version last night, so it's been an interesting cycle. But what we've been pushing for is we're really concerned about states being able to continue the mental health services for the people in their state. So making sure that there's mental health specific funding through the block grant programs at SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, that goes out to the states. We're also concerned so many people that have mental health conditions are also covered by Medicaid. So making sure that there's a temporary bump in the Medicaid rate that states get. It's a matching rate that would kind of take the burden a little bit off of states to continue to provide the same services. And given that Medicaid is such a big payer of healthcare, that's really critical. There's also a provision about extending telehealth flexibilities. It's been so important during this pandemic, but we also know that it's been a critical issue for a lot longer than that hasn't been addressed. For For states like Alaska, where you have people who may not be able to get to a provider, making sure that telehealth is covered is really critical. And so we've been pushing for extensions of the telehealth flexibilities that have been allowed during this pandemic. We want to extend them for at least a year after the crisis ends so that they can be studied and they can determine the best path forward to make them permanent, because we think it's really critical in rural and frontier areas that that flexibility remains, and that people are able to access the care that's best for them and that's available to them in their area. So we've also been working for inclusion of the Medicaid Reentry Act. So anyone who's eligible for Medicaid that's in the criminal justice system is able to get covered 30 days prior to their release. And that's critical to make sure that they have continuity of care as they reenter the community. And as we know that so many, just because there's been such high COVID-19 rates in the prison and jail system, to make sure that as people are released, so that they have those connections to healthcare, including their mental health coverage. So those are just a number of things we've been working on at the federal level. And another big thing that we've been working on is for something called 988, which would be a nationwide 3-digit crisis number. So for mental health crises and suicide prevention, right now, if there's an emergency, people know to call 911. But unfortunately, that often connects you with law enforcement. And to make sure that a mental health crisis gets a mental health response, creating a nationwide 3-digit number is really important. And so 988, I'm happy to report, passed Congress last week, and it's with the president for his signature. So it's really exciting. But now this is something that's going to go to the states, because the states are going to have to work to implement it. So, there's a lot of things that are both a federal issue and a state issue and a local issue. And, there's unfortunately never a lack of things for us to be advocating on.
And I think this is really helpful for me. And I'm glad you brought up telehealth, because that's one in particular. Just to hear all these different things that are happening at the federal level, so that we can identify one or two that are important to us and promote those. So prison reentry, we have a strong prison reentry coalition in town. I'd love to be able to partner with them on the initiative about getting Medicaid available 30 days before release. Like, that's something I didn't know that exists, that we have partners that care about that topic. It would be great to work towards it. And then telehealth, as you mentioned, is obviously very relevant to Alaska, where we have many disparate small communities who do not have mental health services in town. Folks need to access these services over telehealth. And even in larger communities like Juneau, if you're a mental health professional in Juneau, you know the other therapists. There just aren't a lot. Like, for your own personal mental health, you need to get it from someone outside of Juneau. Like, there's just all these different reasons why living here in particular makes telehealth so important. So how can we get a list of all these different initiatives so that we as a NAMI affiliate could go through and identify the ones that resonate the most with us and choose those as our causes in the next whatever period of time?
That's great. So that's a great question. So, we're in an unusual time. We're getting close to the elections, and so Congress is out of town and won't be working on much. They may be working during a lame duck period after the election and before the new Congress is installed. But so we're working heavily on our priorities for 2021. So trying to think of what opportunities might there be to push different issues, and then what's the impact of that at a state level. And so that's information we'll have forthcoming, but we do have, we do encourage folks to sign up for our advocacy alerts at nami.org/take action, where we send out information on opportunities that are available. And we do try to push that out to our affiliates as well, our executive directors and state presidents, when those opportunities can't come up. So, we kind of sent out a checklist of things you might work on at the state level at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so those are pieces of information that we'll send out, but also, if you're somebody who's on Twitter frequently, follow NAMI Advocacy. That's an advocacy specific Twitter handle. And we post a lot of information there on priorities. We link to additional information, articles, various resources on the things that are coming up and that are important to think about. So both at the federal level, and then we also highlight great successes at the state level as well.
Great. So I think that anyone who's a NAMI member can passively receive this information from the advocacy emails or through Twitter. And as long as you're paying attention to those feeds, you're going to understand at least most of the federal issues that are worth promoting at any given time. And then it's on people like me, the directors of different affiliates, to stay engaged and help facilitate those conversations with our membership to make sure that we're all choosing something that's meaningful to us to advocate for. So it's nice that there's like a couple different ways there for us to stay on top of what is available to advocate for.
Yeah, and I'll also say that my colleague Stephanie Pasternak and I work with affiliates and NAMI state organizations across the country. And so we're always happy to talk about priorities and opportunities and things like that. So, you can reach out to us anytime. And I think working with partners is really critical too, making sure that it's not just on your shoulders. I think the breadth of issues that mental health advocates work on mean that there's a lot of natural partners within the community. And I think that can really bolster your strength for advocating on an issue when you bring together a variety of advocates and folks who care about that issue. So I think that's a really good opportunity as well. And I feel like, once there's an election, it's always an opportunity to pause and kind of take stock of what's happening. And certainly, the outcome of the election is going to impact what opportunities there are too. State legislatures, Congress, it's going to put different priorities at the top of the list. And so, making sure that what you're working on will resonate based on what happens with the election is always important. So, I think that's what we're doing. And we're kind of thinking what would be our different opportunities depending on what happens with Congress, the administration, who knows what'll happen. And so I think this is a good opportunity to think about the different options that are out there and be ready for the different possibilities in the future.
Great. So let's say we have the opportunity to talk to our 2 senators in February. And right now it's just about the start of October. And we want to start identifying which specific pieces of legislation we want to promote, or which ideas. Like, I don't know if expanding telehealth would be a specific piece of legislation or just an idea, but like, let's say that's our cause. We want to expand or extend the time period that these telehealth services are available. We start crafting our personal stories to talk about how like these telehealth services positively affect real people that are their constituents. So we've got our story down, we have our cause down. We try to reach out to them, and maybe we find that we only have the time or ability to get in touch with one or the other. Is there a way to prioritize who you speak with? Like, do you want to talk to the people who already agree with you to get them even more fired up? Do you want to talk to the people who disagree with you to change their minds? Like, how do you choose who to speak with if you do have to choose?
That's a great question. So you always want to look at who has the power to shape that issue. So whether it's the state legislature or it's Congress, what committees does that individual sit on? And so if that committee, might have jurisdiction over this issue, I would prioritize that, whether they agree with you or not. You need the people on that committee because it first has to pass through the committee before it can go for a larger vote. So I'd always prioritize that over any other factor. And yes, it's always nice to talk to our supporters and continue to build that relationship. We should never take it for granted. But sometimes I think it's even more impactful to talk with the folks that we may not always agree with. And just because we don't, they may be on the other side of one issue we care about doesn't mean that they'll be there on every issue we care about. And so I think that's really important as a nonpartisan organization to remember that, okay, they may not have agreed with our position on this particular issue, but that doesn't mean it's going to be the same on a very different issue. And so I think it's really important to go into those offices in particular, or virtual offices, and talk to legislators and talk to staffers and to try to build their support over time. You're not necessarily going to get somebody who opposes a lot of your issues to be your biggest champion overnight, but you can gradually move them on the scale. So maybe they opposed you on an issue, but maybe you can get them neutral. And then after a while being neutral, maybe you can get them to support. And after they support and they see the value of these issues, then you can get them to be a champion for our issues. And we've seen it happen before, and it is possible, but I think not putting the pressure on ourselves that we have to completely change somebody's outlook in one interaction. It takes time. And just with anything in life, we have to build that relationship. It makes it much easier to make the ask once we have relationships with policymakers. And so it takes a lot of care and nurturing to build those relationships.
That's really helpful. I love the idea of going to the person who has the power, looking for the person who is on the relevant committee, and that's relevant at the state level as well as the federal level.
Mm-hmm.
So our state has committees. We should obviously spend our time talking to the elected officials who are on those committees. That makes sense. You mentioned staffers. Is it as important to talk to a staffer as it is the actual elected official? What kind of sway does the average staffer have?
Average staffer has a lot, an elected official, whether it's it's your town council, it's state legislature, it's Congress. I mean, they have to act on a lot of different issues, and there's no way that they can be an expert in all of them. They really rely on staff, and I know always at the local level they don't necessarily have staff, but when you do get to the level where you may have staff, they really rely on those folks to develop more expertise on an issue. And that's why staffers are really important. Really make sure that you develop the relationships there too, because it's a two-way street. We ask them to do things, but once they learn that we're a trusted resource, as an issue comes up, they'll reach out to us and ask for NAMI's opinion or our opinion. And that's really important. That's what you really want ultimately, is you want them to proactively be reaching out to you to ask for input and feedback and ideas. That's really the way to go, and cultivating relationships with staffers is one of the best ways to do that. They really, their bosses rely on them. And, I feel like a lot of people discount staffers, but they're absolutely critical, and they keep our governments at all levels moving and working and progressing. And so it's really critical to build those relationships as well.
Awesome. Good to know. What are the different ways that we can get in touch with our elected officials? Like, each federal official has a website. There's a little form to submit feedback on there. There's a phone number that normally goes to voicemail. They have these local little satellite offices that sometimes have people in them and sometimes don't. They come to town at various times of the year, like right now when they're campaigning or when they're on recess, to attend meetings and whatnot. Like, should we be contacting them in all these ways? Should we prioritize one or the other? Should we just take what we can get? How do we think about the fact that there's so many different options there?
It depends on, what you're trying to accomplish. Sometimes when you're just trying to voice your support for an issue, calling the office and making sure that you as a constituent, your feedback is registered, because they do tally up every phone call they get on an issue and where it stands, and they present that information to their boss, and every email they get also figures into the information they give to their boss. And so those are really valuable ways, to make sure your voice is counted. I think sometimes when it's a priority issue for us, scheduling a meeting is a great opportunity, and any constituent can request that. There's usually a form on the website, and you can request that opportunity. And I think now we're finding that offices are having more ability to do that because they're doing it virtually. And so rather than having to meet in person, they actually, instead of the time spent in between meetings, they're actually able to do a lot more of them. So I know a lot of NAMI members from across the country have had virtual meetings with their members of Congress or their offices, and it's been really effective. I know we've asked a lot of folks to have meetings about our COVID-19 priorities, because again, it's more effective coming from constituents than from the office in DC. So there's a lot of ways. You can even tweet at them. You can post on their Facebook page. All of those things are counted, and they're all important. But I think it choosing the option depends on what kind of time do you have, because if you're going to schedule a meeting, you really have to prepare for it. And kind of what level of priority is it for you? Because you don't want to take up their time with every issue on the planet. You really want to use it for those top priorities.
Yeah, there's a lot to think through here. And so as I'm listening to you, and this has been awesome information, by the way, I'm thinking about just maybe having somebody be our advocacy point person for our affiliate. And I would love for it to be a board member for any that are listening right now, and just kind of like keep us on track for this. Like try to set up an in-person meeting once a year, and maybe every 3 months, write a letter, or, do one of those less intensive contacts as well, just to make sure that we're always doing something. Because from everything I've heard from you today, there's multiple ways to get in touch. You're developing a relationship, which takes time, and it's going to be a gradual thing to get folks to change. So sustained effort seems really important, and having somebody to lead that sustained effort seems like the best way for it to happen at our organization.
I mean, that sounds like a great idea. Always having somebody who's kind of keeping their eye on the ball and making sure that continually do this, because it is important to keep the drumbeat going. And again, you don't always need to have a meeting, but checking in with the staffer, letting them know something new that NAMI has available, or new resource you're offering in the community. Just keeping those points of contacts over time, is really important. You think about it, like your professional network, you try to keep up, like old bosses and colleagues, you try to stay in touch with them, because if you don't want to ever reach out to them out of the blue if you need something. You want to continue those relationships. That's valuable, but you got to put something into it to continue that connection. And it's the same here. You got to put some effort into it to keep that connection. And so having somebody who's making sure that's happening, I think is really valuable. But, I also would say, like, you don't have to do it alone. Again, we are a resource. We are here. And, signing up for those alerts might give you ideas of issues to talk about, but always check in with us, because we'll give you the latest priorities we're working on, the status of things. Or if you're meeting with a state legislator, we can help brainstorm about the best way to go, or provide some talking points. There's lots of ways that we can be helpful.
Fantastic. This has been great. You've developed my thinking about advocacy quite a bit just in the past half hour. And I really just have one last question for you. If we can go back to those personal stories that you think are kind of the bedrock of changing somebody's opinion, what makes a good personal story? Like what are the elements of a good personal story? Is it 45 minutes long, or is it 3 minutes long? Is it like how do I craft a nice, concise story?
That is such a good question. So, I think the best way is to really think about it as like your elevator speech. Trying to get your story down to 90 seconds. It seems impossible, but the more you practice, the more you can do it. And if you have more time, that's wonderful. But sometimes you are just catching a legislator in between meetings. They're running late. They're only going to spend a few minutes with you. So you want to make sure that you're hitting the highlights. And so practicing, getting it down is really important. And again, sharing, the most impactful experiences. Was there a turning point? Was there a specific instance that really changed you or your loved one's life? And what happened? What helped? What would have helped? If you're in the unfortunate situation where you didn't have help, what would have changed that? We want to be honest, but we also want to give our legislators hope that there's something that they can do to change this for others in the future. And so, too many in the NAMI community have tragic stories. So talking about what would have helped, what would have made a difference is also a really powerful way to kind of give them that hope that they can do something to change this for other people. And again, really summarizing what you want them to do. I think that's always, you got to kind of end the story and go right into what can they do to change it. I think that really makes the difference, and that puts them on the hook to act and use their power and their ability to change the situation. Fantastic.
Couldn't possibly ask you for anything else. Hannah, your expertise is very appreciated, and my head's overflowing with ideas about how to put your words into practice here in Alaska. So thank you so much for your time. I really, really.
Oh, you're too kind. It was such a pleasure talking with you, and my door is always open. So, reach out anytime that we can be helpful to all of your efforts in Alaska.
Fantastic. We will do that. Thanks everyone for watching. This will be available to watch as recording on Facebook immediately afterwards, and YouTube in a couple weeks. It seems to take us forever to upload to YouTube. YouTube doesn't always want to be friendly, but so be it. It'll be on there soon enough. Tomorrow's our last presentation. You'll hear from Nami-Juno staff about why we do what we do. So thanks everyone for sticking with us this month. And thank you again, Hannah, for your expertise today. Bye, everyone.